I should have known the moment I saw him standing in the entrance hall that my carefully constructed life was about to shatter. Men like Inspector James Hartley did not simply investigate and leave. The rain had been falling for 3 days without cease, turning the grounds of Thornfield House into a gray, sodden wasteland that seemed to mirror the heaviness in my chest. I stood at the top of the servants' staircase, one hand pressed against the cold stone wall, watching as Mrs. Pemberton ushered the inspector inside. Water dripped from the brim of his hat onto the black and white tiles, each drop echoing in the cavernous space like a countdown I could not stop. He was taller than I had expected, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar despite the rain's attempts to plaster it down. Even from my vantage point, I could see the sharp intelligence in his eyes as they swept the hall, cataloging every detail, missing nothing. He moved with the careful precision of a man accustomed to finding truths people preferred to keep hidden. I felt my breath catch, though I could not have said why. Perhaps it was simply fear. Perhaps it was something else entirely. I had 3 choices in that moment. I could retreat back up the stairs and pretend I had never seen him. I could descend and introduce myself as protocol demanded. Or I could remain frozen exactly where I stood, caught between the life I had built and the past I had fled. Pemberton's voice drifted up the stairwell, high and nervous as it always became when she was flustered. She was explaining about the missing girl, Mary Winters, a chambermaid of 17 who had vanished 4 nights ago without taking her cloak or her wages. The police had been slow to respond. A missing servant was hardly worthy of their immediate attention. But someone, perhaps Mary's mother or one of the other staff, had persisted. And so they had sent Inspector Hartley. I forced my feet to move, descending the stairs with the measured steps I had perfected over 6 years of service. My black dress whispered against the stone. My hands, folded neatly at my waist, did not tremble. By the time I reached the bottom step, I had arranged my face into the expression of polite concern expected of a governess in such circumstances. Mrs. Pemberton turned at the sound of my approach, relief flooding her features. She was a good woman, but she had never been comfortable with authority, and the presence of a detective in her domain had clearly unsettled her. "Miss Ashford," she said, "thank goodness. This is Inspector Hartley from Scotland Yard. He has come about poor Mary." The inspector removed his hat and inclined his head in a gesture that managed to be both respectful and somehow searching. His eyes met mine, and I felt that strange catch in my breath again. They were gray, the color of the storm outside, and they looked at me as though he could see through the careful walls I had built around myself. "Miss Ashford," he said, and his voice was deeper than I had anticipated, with a warmth that seemed at odds with the severity of his profession. "I understand you are the governess here. I will need to speak with everyone in the household, but perhaps we might begin with you." It was not a request. I inclined my head in acknowledgement, though every instinct I possessed screamed at me to refuse, to claim pressing duties with the children, to find any excuse that might delay this conversation. But refusal would only draw more attention, and attention was the last thing I could afford. "Of course, Inspector," I said, and I was proud of how steady my voice remained. "Shall we speak in the morning room? It will be more comfortable there." He nodded, and I led him down the corridor, acutely aware of his presence behind me. The house felt different with him in it, as though his very existence had shifted something in the air. Or perhaps it was only my own guilt, rising like fog from the places I had tried so hard to bury it. The morning room was cold and dim, the fire having burned down to embers. I moved to add more coal, grateful for the mundane task that gave me a moment to compose myself. When I turned back, he was standing by the window, looking out at the rain-soaked gardens. The gray light fell across his profile, and I noticed the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble along his jaw. He could not have been much older than 35. Yet there was a weariness about him that spoke of too many dark things seen, too many questions left unanswered. "How long have you been at Thornfield House, Miss Ashford?" he asked without turning from the window. 6 years, I replied. I came when the youngest child, Miss Beatrice, was 4 years old. And in that time, have there been any other incidents? Disappearances, strange occurrences, anything that might relate to Miss Winters's absence? I hesitated. There had been incidents, of course. The house was old, with a history that stretched back 2 centuries, and old houses collected stories the way attics collected dust. But to speak of them seemed dangerous, as though each word might lead him closer to truths I could not afford to reveal. The servants sometimes speak of strange things, I said carefully. Footsteps in empty corridors, doors that open by themselves. But I have always attributed such tales to imagination and the natural creaking of an old building. He turned then, and his gaze fixed on me with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. And the mirror, Miss Ashford, what do the servants say about the mirror? My hands, folded so neatly in my lap, tightened until my knuckles went white. How did he know about the mirror? Who had spoken to him before he had even entered the house? I do not put stock in superstition, Inspector, I said. But even I could hear the brittleness in my voice. That was not my question. The silence stretched between us, taut as a wire. Outside, the rain continued its relentless drumming against the windows. I could feel my carefully constructed composure beginning to crack, and I knew that if I did not give him something, he would only dig deeper. There is a room on the 3rd floor, I said finally. It has been closed for many years. The servants believe there is a mirror there that shows visions of the future, or of things that might have been. I have never seen it myself. This was a lie, and I suspected he knew it. But he did not press, not yet. Instead, he pulled a small notebook from his coat pocket and began to write, his hand moving across the page with practiced efficiency. "When did you last see Mary Winters?" he asked. 4 days ago, in the evening. She brought hot water to the nursery for the children's baths. She seemed herself, perhaps a bit distracted, but nothing alarming. Did she mention any plans, anyone she might have been meeting? I shook my head. Mary was a quiet girl. She kept to herself. He made another notation, then looked up at me again. That penetrating gaze that seemed to see too much. I have found, Miss Ashford, that in cases such as these, the truth is often hidden not in what people say, but in what they refuse to say. If you know anything at all, that might help me find Miss Winters, I urge you to speak now. For a wild moment, I considered telling him everything. About the mirror, about what I had seen there 6 years ago, about the reason I had come to this house in the first place. But the words would not come. They were locked behind years of silence, and I did not know how to break that seal. "I know nothing that would help you, Inspector," I said, and I stood, smoothing my skirts in a gesture of dismissal. "If you will excuse me, I must attend to the children." He did not move to stop me, but as I reached the door, his voice followed me into the corridor. "I will need to search the house, Miss Ashford, including the 3rd floor." My hand froze on the doorknob. "Of course," I said without turning. "I am certain Lord Ashton will grant you whatever access you require." I fled then, though I kept my pace measured, dignified. Only when I reached the nursery and closed the door behind me did I allow myself to lean against it, my heart hammering against my ribs. Beatrice looked up from her watercolors, her blue eyes wide with concern. "Miss Eleanor, are you unwell? You look pale." I forced a smile and moved to her side, resting a hand on her shoulder. "I am perfectly well, darling. Now show me what you have painted." But I was not well. I was anything but well. Because Inspector James Hartley intended to search the 3rd floor, which meant he would find the mirror. And if he found the mirror, and if it showed him what it had shown me all those years ago, then everything I had built, every careful step I had taken to become someone other than the woman I had been, would crumble into dust. The afternoon wore on in its usual rhythms. I helped Beatrice with her French pronunciation and listened to her younger brother, William, recite his Latin declensions. I corrected their posture and praised their progress and did all the things a governess was meant to do. But beneath it all, I was aware of Inspector Hartley moving through the house like a shadow, speaking to servants, examining rooms, drawing ever closer to the third floor and its secrets. By dinner time, I had developed a headache that was only partly feigned. I took my meal in the nursery with the children, as was customary, and was grateful when their nurse came to put them to bed. I stood at the window, watching the rain continue its assault on the grounds, and tried not to think about gray eyes and penetrating questions and the way my heart had stuttered when he had said my name. A knock at the door startled me from my reverie. "Come in," I called, expecting one of the maids. It was not a maid. It was him. Inspector Hartley stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Forgive the intrusion, Miss Ashford. I wanted to inform you that I will be conducting my search of the third floor tomorrow morning. I thought you might wish to be present." "Why would I wish that?" I asked, though I knew the answer before he spoke it. "Because you are frightened of what I might find there," he said simply. "And I have learned that the things people fear most are often the things I need most to understand." I should have been angry at his presumption. Instead, I felt a strange sort of relief, as though some part of me had been waiting for someone to finally see through my carefully maintained facade. "What time?" I asked. 8 o'clock, he replied. He turned to leave, then paused. "Miss Ashford, whatever happened in your past, whatever brought you to this house, I want you to know that I am not here to judge you. I am here to find the truth. Sometimes those are the same thing, but not always." He left before I could respond, and I was glad because I had no idea what I would have said. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window and watched his figure cross the courtyard toward the carriage house, where Mrs. Pemberton had arranged for him to stay during the investigation. That night, I did not sleep. I lay in my narrow bed and listened to the house settle around me, every creak and whisper seeming to carry a warning. At some point past midnight, I rose and lit a candle, then made my way through the silent corridors to the third floor. I had not been there in 4 years. I had promised myself I would never go there again. But if Inspector Hartley was going to see the mirror tomorrow, then I needed to see it first. I needed to know if it would show him the same vision it had shown me that terrible night 6 years ago. The door to the forgotten room stood at the end of a narrow hallway, its white paint yellowed with age. My hand trembled as I turned the handle. The hinges protested with a low groan that seemed obscenely loud in the darkness. I stepped inside and raised my candle. The room was exactly as I remembered it. Dust sheets covered shapeless furniture. Cobwebs hung in the corners like tattered lace. And there, against the far wall, stood the mirror, its surface hidden beneath a black velvet drape. I had covered it myself, the morning after that first vision. I had thought that if I could not see it, it could not hurt me. But I had been wrong. The mirror did not need to be seen to exert its influence. It simply waited, patient as stone, for the moment when its truth would be required. My candle flame guttered in a draught I could not feel. The shadows danced and twisted. And for a moment I thought I saw movement in the periphery of my vision. But when I turned, there was nothing. Only the draped mirror and my own reflection in the dark window. I moved closer, my heart thundering so loudly I was certain someone would hear and come to investigate. My free hand reached out, fingers trembling, and grasped the edge of the velvet drape. One pull, and I would see. One pull, and I would know if the future it had shown me was still waiting, or if 6 years of careful distance had changed what was written in that silver surface. But I could not do it. Coward that I was, I could not bear to look. I backed away, nearly stumbling over a covered chair in my haste to escape. The candle flame leaped and twisted, throwing wild shadows across the walls. I reached the door and pulled it shut behind me, then leaned against it, breathing hard. Tomorrow, Inspector Hartley would enter that room. Tomorrow, he would pull aside that drape. And tomorrow, I would learn whether the mirror's prophecy had been a promise or merely a cruel trick of light and longing. I returned to my room and sat by the window until dawn began to gray the eastern sky. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the world washed clean and strangely hushed. Birds began their morning songs. Somewhere below, I heard the kitchen staff beginning their day. At precisely 8 o'clock, I descended to the entrance hall. Inspector Hartley was already there, speaking quietly with Lord Ashton, who had returned late the previous night from business in London. When he saw me, the inspector nodded, a gesture of acknowledgement that felt weighted with significance. "Shall we?" he said, and it was not quite a question. I nodded and led him up the main staircase, then up again to the 3rd floor. My legs felt like lead. Each step required a conscious effort of will. Behind me, I could hear the measured tread of his boots, steady and inevitable as fate itself. We reached the door. I placed my hand on the knob and found it warm to the touch, though the corridor was cold. When I glanced back at Inspector Hartley, I saw that he was watching me with an expression I could not quite read. Concern, perhaps, or curiosity, or something else entirely. I turned the handle and pushed the door open. Daylight streamed through the uncovered window, illuminating the dust motes that swirled in the disturbed air. Everything was exactly as I had left it mere hours ago, except for one crucial detail. The black velvet drape lay pooled on the floor beneath the mirror, and the mirror itself shone in the morning light, its surface clear and bright as water, waiting. Inspector Hartley stepped past me into the room, and I followed because there was nothing else I could do. We stood side by side before that ancient glass, and I held my breath, waiting for whatever truth it would reveal. At first, there was nothing, just our reflections, pale and distorted in the old silver. His tall figure beside my smaller one, his dark coat and my black dress. 2 strangers brought together by circumstance and mystery. Then the surface began to shimmer, like water disturbed by a stone. The reflections blurred and reformed, and I saw what I had seen once before, 6 years ago on the night I had fled to this house, seeking refuge from a life I could no longer bear. I saw myself in white, a wedding dress of silk and lace that I would never own. I saw orange blossoms in my hair and a veil that drifted like mist around my shoulders, and beside me, his hand clasping mine with a tenderness that made my chest ache, stood Inspector James Hartley. The vision was so vivid, I could almost smell the flowers, almost feel the brush of lace against my skin. We were in a small church, simple and beautiful, with sunlight streaming through stained glass windows. And we were looking at each other with an expression I had never allowed myself to hope for. Love. Pure and unguarded and absolutely real. Then the vision shifted, and I saw us later that same night, in a bedroom I did not recognize, with moonlight spilling across a wide bed. I saw myself turning toward him, saw his hands gentle on my face, saw the moment before a kiss that would change everything. It was too intimate, too private, too impossible. I turned away with a gasp, pressing my hand to my mouth. Beside me, Inspector Hartley stood utterly still. His face had gone pale, and when he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. What in God's name was that? I could not answer, could not breathe, could only stand there with my back to the mirror and feel the future it had shown me pressing against my spine, like a hand pushing me forward into a life I did not deserve and could not accept. Because the mirror had not shown him the whole truth. It had not shown him what I had done, or who I really was, or the reason I could never, ever allow myself to love anyone again. It had shown him a lie wrapped in prophecy, and I had no idea how to make him understand that some futures, no matter how beautiful, were never meant to come true. The silence in that dusty room stretched until it became almost unbearable. I could feel Inspector Hartley's gaze on me, could sense the questions forming in his mind, but I could not bring myself to meet his eyes. The mirror behind us seemed to pulse with a presence that made the air thick and difficult to breathe. Finally, he spoke, and his voice carried a careful control that told me he was far more shaken than he wished to appear. "Miss Ashford, I need you to explain what just happened, what we both saw." I shook my head, still unable to turn around, still unable to face either him or the mirror. "You said yourself you came here seeking truth, Inspector. Well, now you have found it. This is what the servants fear. This is why the room has been closed for years. That is not an explanation." I forced myself to turn, keeping my eyes fixed firmly on his face, rather than the silvered surface behind him. "The mirror shows visions," I said, and each word felt like a confession. "Some say it shows the future. Others claim it shows only possibilities, paths that might be taken or avoided. I do not pretend to understand its nature. I know only that what it reveals is always deeply personal, always something the viewer either desperately wants or desperately fears. And what we just saw," he said slowly, carefully, "was that something you want or something you fear." The question hung between us like smoke. I could have lied. Perhaps I should have. But standing there in that room with the morning light falling across his face, with the impossible vision still burning behind my eyes, I found I could not add another falsehood to the pile I had already built. "Both," I whispered. "It is both." His expression shifted, something flickering in those gray eyes that might have been surprise or might have been something else entirely. He took a step toward me, and I instinctively stepped back, maintaining the distance between us. He noticed the movement and stopped. "Miss Ashford, Eleanor," he said, and the sound of my given name in his voice sent a strange tremor through me. "I do not understand what is happening here. I came to this house to find a missing girl, and instead, I find myself confronted with impossible visions and a woman who looks at me as though I am both salvation and damnation. I need you to help me make sense of this." I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the stuffiness of the room. "You cannot make sense of it, Inspector. Some things exist beyond the reach of logic and investigation. The mirror is one of them. As for Mary Winters, I truly do not know what happened to her. But I can tell you this. If she came to this room, if she looked into that mirror, she might have seen something that drove her to leave, or to hide, or to do something far worse. You believe the mirror is dangerous. I believe it shows people truths they are not ready to see. Whether that constitutes danger is a matter of interpretation." He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from me to the mirror and back again. Then he pulled out his notebook and began to write, falling back into the familiar rhythms of his profession as though they could anchor him against the strangeness of what he had witnessed. "I need to know more about this mirror," he said without looking up from his notes. "Its history, who has looked into it before, what they saw. Can you provide that information?" "Some of it," I replied. "The mirror has been in this house for nearly 200 years. It was brought from Italy by the first Lord Ashton, who acquired it from a Venetian merchant under circumstances that are not entirely clear. The family records mention it only obliquely, always with a certain unease. Over the generations, there have been incidents. A daughter who saw her own death and wasted away from fear within a year. A son who saw himself wealthy and powerful, then gambled away the family fortune trying to make the vision come true. A governess who saw herself married to the master of the house and was dismissed when her hopes became too obvious to ignore. And you," he said quietly, still writing. "What did you see the first time you looked into it?" I looked away, toward the window and the gray morning beyond. "I saw freedom," I said, which was true enough, if incomplete. "I saw a life I thought I could never have, and I learned that wanting something desperately does not make it possible or right." He closed his notebook and tucked it back into his coat. His expression had gentled, the professional mask slipping enough to reveal genuine concern beneath. "Miss Ashford, whatever you are running from, whatever brought you to this house 6 years ago, it does not have to define the rest of your life. People can change. Circumstances can shift. Even the past can be, if not forgiven, at least understood. "You do not know what I have done," I said, and my voice came out sharper than I had intended. "You do not know who I was or what I am capable of. Then tell me." The invitation was so simple, so direct, that it nearly broke something in me. For 6 years I had carried my secrets alone, had built walls so high and so strong that I had almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen, truly seen, by another human being. And now this man, this stranger who had walked into my carefully ordered life less than 24 hours ago, was asking me to tear those walls down. "I cannot," I said, and I heard the thickness in my voice, felt the treacherous sting of tears I refused to shed. "Please, Inspector, I cannot." He studied me for a long moment, and I thought I saw disappointment flicker across his features. But when he spoke, his voice was gentle. "Very well. But know this, Eleanor. Whatever the mirror showed us, whatever future it claims awaits, I am not a man who believes in fate or prophecy. I believe in choices, and I believe that every person deserves the chance to choose their own path, regardless of what the past suggests or what some supernatural mirror claims to predict." "Then you should leave this house," I told him. "You should abandon this investigation and go back to London and forget everything you saw here today." He smiled then, a small wry expression that transformed his entire face. "I am afraid that is not in my nature. I finish what I start, Miss Ashford, and I help people whether they wish to be helped or not." Before I could respond, footsteps sounded in the corridor outside, followed by Mrs. Pemberton's anxious voice. "Inspector Hartley, Miss Ashford, are you up there? Lord Ashton wishes to speak with you both immediately." We exchanged a glance, and I saw my own apprehension reflected in his eyes. Together we left the room, and I pulled the door firmly shut behind us, as though that simple action could contain what we had witnessed. Lord Ashton was waiting in his study, a room of dark wood and leather that smelled of pipe tobacco and old books. He was a man in his middle 50s, handsome in a severe way, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines of responsibility etched deep around his mouth. He had always been kind to me, distant but fair, and I had served his household with gratitude for the sanctuary it provided. Now, however, his expression was troubled. He gestured for us to sit, then paced to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "Inspector," he began, "I have just received word from the village. Another girl has gone missing. Sarah Collins, daughter of the blacksmith. She was last seen 2 nights ago, heading toward Thornfield House to visit her cousin who works in our kitchens." Inspector Hartley went very still. "Did she arrive at the house?" Lord Ashton shook his head. "Her cousin says she never came, but 3 people saw her on the road that leads past our grounds. She was carrying a small bag and seemed in good spirits. Then she simply vanished." The inspector stood and moved to the desk, pulling out his notebook once more. "I need a description of Miss Collins, age, appearance, any distinguishing features." As Lord Ashton provided the details, I sat frozen in my chair, a terrible suspicion beginning to form in my mind. 2 girls, both young, both last seen near Thornfield House, both vanished without a trace, and both, I realized with a cold certainty, had recently started keeping company with Thomas Garrett, the groundskeeper's son, a young man who had always made me uneasy, though I had never been able to articulate precisely why. Inspector Hartley must have seen something in my face, because he stopped writing mid-sentence and looked at me sharply. "Miss Ashford, do you know something?" I hesitated, weighing loyalty against duty, comfort against truth. Then I thought of Mary Winters, barely 17, and Sarah Collins, whose face I could picture from seeing her in the village. They were someone's daughters, someone's hopes for the future, and if my suspicions could help find them, I had no right to remain silent. "There is a young man," I said slowly. "Thomas Garrett. He has been working on the grounds for about 2 years. Both Mary and Sarah had been seen speaking with him on several occasions. The other servants have gossiped about it. Lord Ashton's face darkened. Thomas Garrett, John Garrett's boy. I know him. A quiet lad, seems harmless enough. Surely you cannot be suggesting he had anything to do with these disappearances. I am suggesting nothing, my lord. I am merely providing information that might be relevant to the inspector's investigation. Inspector Hartley was already moving toward the door. Where can I find this Thomas Garrett now? He should be working near the stables, Lord Ashton replied, but his voice had lost its certainty. Inspector, I must tell you, the Garretts have served this family for 3 generations. I would stake my reputation on their character. People are not always what they seem, the inspector said quietly, and I felt those words like a blow, knowing they applied as much to me as to anyone else. Lord Ashton, I will need to question young Mr. Garrett immediately. Miss Ashford, I would like you to accompany me. I blinked in surprise. Why would you need me present? Because the servants trust you. If there is a chance that Garrett is innocent and simply knows something he has been afraid to share, your presence might help him feel safe enough to speak freely. And if he is guilty, well, sometimes a man will reveal himself more completely when there is a woman present to whom he wishes to prove his innocence. It was a test, I realized. He wanted to see how I would react, what I might observe. He was including me in his investigation not out of courtesy, but because he believed I could be useful. The thought should have disturbed me. Instead, I felt a strange flutter of something that might have been anticipation. Very well, I said, standing. Let us speak with Thomas Garrett. We found him exactly where Lord Ashton had suggested, mucking out one of the stables with methodical efficiency. He was a young man of perhaps 22, with sandy hair and a thin, angular face that always seemed to be calculating something. When he saw us approaching, his hands stilled on the pitchfork, and I saw wariness flash across his features before he schooled them into polite neutrality. Mr. Garrett, Inspector Hartley said, his voice pleasant but firm. I am investigating the disappearances of Mary Winters and Sarah Collins. I understand you were acquainted with both young women. Thomas leaned the pitchfork against the wall and wiped his hands on his work trousers. I knew them. Mary worked in the house, and Sarah, I saw her sometimes when she came to visit her cousin. But I do not know anything about them going missing. I told the other constable that when he came asking yesterday, the inspector pulled out his notebook. When was the last time you saw Mary Winters? Thomas's eyes flickered toward me, then away. Maybe 4-5 days ago. She was crossing the yard toward the kitchen door. I called out a greeting, but she did not stop. Seemed like she was in a hurry. And Sarah Collins. I have not seen Sarah in near a fortnight. She stopped coming round to visit. I figured maybe her father did not approve of her spending time here. Why would her father disapprove? I asked, surprising myself with the question. Thomas looked at me directly for the first time, and I saw something cold and assessing in his gaze that made me instinctively step closer to Inspector Hartley. Because people talk, Miss Ashford. They see a common girl spending time near a great house, and they think she has notions above her station. Or they think worse things. You know how people are. Inspector Hartley moved slightly, positioning himself between Thomas and me in a gesture so subtle I almost missed it. Mr. Garrett, do you have any idea where these young women might have gone? Anywhere they spoke of wanting to visit, anyone they might have been afraid of? Thomas shook his head slowly. Mary was a quiet sort, never spoke much of anything beyond her work. And Sarah, well, Sarah had dreams. She wanted more than the village could offer, more than a blacksmith's daughter was likely to get. But that is not a crime, is it, Inspector? Wanting more? No, the inspector agreed. But acting on those wants in ways that harm others certainly is. The air in the stable seemed to thicken with tension. Thomas's jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he might say something rash. But then he seemed to collect himself, and when he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. I have nothing more to tell you, Inspector. I did not harm those girls, and I do not know where they are. If that is all, I have work to finish." Inspector Hartley regarded him for a long moment, and I could practically see him cataloging every detail of Thomas's demeanor, filing away inconsistencies to examine later. "Very well, Mr. Garrett, but I will likely have more questions. Do not leave the grounds without informing Lord Ashton." We walked back toward the house in silence. The morning had turned gray again, with clouds massing on the horizon promising more rain. I pulled my shawl tighter around my shoulders and tried to organize my thoughts. "You do not believe him," I said finally. "I believe he is hiding something," the inspector replied. "Whether that something relates to the disappearances or is merely personal trouble of his own, I cannot yet say, but I will find out." We reached the side entrance to the house, and he paused with his hand on the door. "Eleanor, I want you to be careful around Thomas Garrett. Do not speak to him alone. Do not go anywhere near the stables or the groundskeeper's cottage without someone else present. If my instincts are correct, he may be dangerous." The concern in his voice warmed something in my chest that I had thought long frozen. "I will be careful," I promised. He nodded, seemingly satisfied, and opened the door. But before I could step through, a scream split the air, high and terrified, coming from somewhere inside the house. We both ran, following the sound to the main staircase. Mrs. Pemberton stood at the bottom, her face white as chalk, one trembling hand pointing upward. "The third floor," she gasped. "Oh God, Inspector, Miss Ashford, there is something on the third floor." We took the stairs two at a time, the inspector ahead of me, his hand reaching instinctively toward his coat where I assumed he carried some kind of weapon. My heart hammered against my ribs as we reached the third-floor corridor, and I saw immediately what had caused Mrs. Pemberton's terror. The door to the mirror room stood open, wide open, though I had closed it firmly behind us less than an hour ago. And from within, a strange, silvery light pulsed and flickered, casting dancing shadows across the hallway floor. Inspector Hartley held out a hand to stop me. "Stay here," he commanded, but I could not. Whatever was happening in that room, whatever the mirror wanted to show, I knew with a bone-deep certainty that it concerned me as much as him. I followed him through the doorway, and what I saw there stopped my breath. The mirror's surface was alive with images, shifting and reforming so rapidly I could barely track them. I saw myself as a young woman, younger than I was now, dressed in fine clothes I had not worn in years. I saw a man whose face I had tried so hard to forget, whose name I never allowed myself to speak. I saw a moment of violence, of fear, of a choice that could not be unmade. And then the images shifted again, and I saw Mary Winters. She was not dead, but she was trapped somewhere dark and cold, her hands bound, her face streaked with tears. And standing over her, just beyond the edge of the mirror's vision, was a figure I could not quite make out. Beside me, Inspector Hartley made a sound low in his throat. "Where is that?" he demanded, as though the mirror could answer. "Where is she being held?" The mirror pulsed once more, and the image changed. I saw the exterior of a building I recognized, an old stone structure about half a mile from the main house, part of the original estate that had long since fallen into disuse. The old chapel, unused since the new church had been built in the village decades ago. "She is there," I whispered. "Mary is in the old chapel." Inspector Hartley turned to me, his eyes blazing with urgency and something else, something that looked almost like wonder. "How can you be certain?" "Because the mirror does not lie," I said simply. "It may show possibilities or futures that never come to pass, but what it shows in the present moment is always true." He held my gaze for a long moment, and I saw the decision forming in his eyes. "Then we go. Now." Before whoever is holding her realizes we know. He was already moving toward the door, but I caught his arm, feeling the solid warmth of him beneath the fabric of his coat. "Inspector, James, please. If the mirror is showing us this, there may be a reason. there may be danger. Then we will face it together, he said firmly. Because that is what the mirror showed us, is it not? A future where we stand side by side. Perhaps this is how that future begins. His words struck something deep in my chest, a chord of hope and terror intertwined. Before I could respond, before I could tell him all the reasons why that future was impossible, he was pulling me with him down the stairs, shouting for someone to fetch Lord Ashton and several of the male servants. Within minutes we had assembled a group of 5 men, including the inspector, Lord Ashton himself, and 3 of the burlier footmen. I insisted on accompanying them, despite Lord Ashton's protests, and to my surprise, Inspector Hartley supported my inclusion. She may be frightened, he said. A woman's presence might help calm her. We set out across the grounds, the gray sky pressing down like a weight, the wind picking up and carrying with it the smell of coming rain. The old chapel stood at the edge of a copse of trees, its stone walls stained with moss and age. As we approached, I felt a sense of wrongness emanating from the building, as though the very air around it had been poisoned. Inspector Hartley motioned for silence and approached the door cautiously. It was not locked, but barred from the outside, a heavy wooden beam laid across iron brackets. He lifted it carefully, setting it aside with barely a sound, then pushed the door open. The interior was dim, lit only by the gray light filtering through gaps in the boarded windows. The air smelled of damp stone and decay. And there, in the far corner, exactly as the mirror had shown, was Mary Winters. She was alive, conscious, her eyes wide with terror. When she saw us, she tried to cry out, but her voice was hoarse, broken. Inspector Hartley rushed to her side, working to untie the ropes that bound her hands and feet, while Lord Ashton wrapped his coat around her trembling shoulders. "Who did this to you?" the inspector asked gently. "Mary, who brought you here?" But before she could answer, I heard it. A footstep behind us, a presence in the doorway that made every instinct I possessed scream in warning. I turned, and my blood ran cold. Standing in the entrance, backlit by the gray morning, was Thomas Garrett, and in his hand he held a length of rope and a knife that gleamed dully in the shadows. His face was calm, almost serene, and that was perhaps the most terrifying thing of all. He looked at us with something like pity, as though we were children who had stumbled into a game we did not understand. "You should not have come here," he said quietly. "You should not have interfered. The mirror showed me what I needed to do. It showed me my destiny, and none of you have the right to stand in its way." Inspector Hartley moved in front of me, his body a shield between Thomas and the rest of us. "Mr. Garrett, put down the knife. Whatever you think you are doing, whatever you believe the mirror has shown you, it ends now. Mary is safe. You cannot hurt anyone else." Thomas laughed, a sound without humor. "Safe? You think she is safe because you found her. You understand nothing, Inspector. The mirror does not show one future. It shows all possible futures. And in most of them, in nearly all of them, she dies here today. You arriving, you finding her. That is just one small branch on a tree with 1,000 branches, and I have seen where most of those branches lead." He took a step forward, and the footman moved to flank the inspector, forming a barrier. But I could see the madness in Thomas's eyes now, the absolute conviction of someone who had stared too long into that silver surface and lost his ability to distinguish between what might be and what must be. "The mirror showed me greatness," Thomas continued, his voice rising. "It showed me power and recognition and everything I was denied by birth. But it demanded a price. It always demands a price. 3 sacrifices to unlock 3 futures. I have made 2 already. Mary was to be the 3rd. And now you have ruined everything." "Where is Sarah Collins?" Inspector Hartley demanded. "What did you do to her?" Thomas smiled, and it was the most chilling expression I had ever seen. "She sleeps beneath the earth, where the mirror told me to place her. She and the other one, the serving girl from the village who no one has even noticed, is gone. They are the foundation, the price paid for the future I deserve. He lunged then, moving with shocking speed, the knife aimed directly at Inspector Hartley's chest. But I had already seen the tension gathering in Thomas's body, had already anticipated the attack because I had spent 6 years learning to read the smallest signs of violence about to unfold. I threw myself forward, shouting a warning, and collided with the inspector, knocking him aside just as the blade whistled through the space where his heart had been. We fell together in a tangle of limbs and fabric, and I felt his arms come around me, protecting me even as I had tried to protect him. The footman seized Thomas, wrestling him to the ground despite his struggles. Lord Ashton grabbed the knife from his hand and threw it far across the chapel floor. And in the chaos, in the confusion, I found myself looking up into Inspector Hartley's face, our bodies pressed close, his breath warm against my cheek. "You saved my life," he said softly, wonder and something deeper coloring his voice. "You would have done the same for me," I replied, and knew it was true. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of us. The gray light, the cold stone, the distant sound of Thomas's curses as he was bound, all of it faded into insignificance. There was only his face above mine, his arms around me, and the impossible, terrifying knowledge that the mirror had been right. I was falling in love with Inspector James Hartley, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The days following Thomas Garrett's arrest passed in a blur of police interviews, medical examinations, and whispered conversations that fell silent whenever I entered a room. Mary Winters was taken to the village doctor and then home to her mother, traumatized but alive. The search for Sarah Collins and the other missing girl, a scullery maid named Anne Pritchard whom no one had thought to report missing, yielded exactly what Thomas had promised. 2 bodies, buried in the woods at the edge of the estate, in places he claimed the mirror had shown him. I did not sleep well those nights. When I closed my eyes, I saw Thomas's face, that terrible serenity as he described what he had done. And I saw the mirror, that ancient silvered surface that had promised him greatness and demanded blood in return. I had always known the mirror was dangerous, but I had thought the danger lay in what it showed. I had never considered that it might drive someone to manufacture the future it revealed through violence and madness. Inspector Hartley remained at Thornfield House, coordinating with the local constabulary, taking statements, piecing together the full scope of Thomas's crimes. I saw him often, though we rarely spoke privately. When our eyes met across crowded rooms, I felt that same pull, that same impossible connection the mirror had shown us. And each time, I looked away first, because I could not bear the weight of what might be possible. On the 4th day, after the arrest, he found me in the library. I was pretending to read, though I had not turned a page in nearly an hour. The children were with their tutor for mathematics, and I had sought refuge in the one room where I might be left alone with my thoughts. He knocked softly on the doorframe, though the door stood open. "May I come in?" I closed my book, a volume of poetry I had been staring at without comprehension. "Of course, Inspector." He entered and closed the door behind him, a gesture that felt significant in its intimacy. Then he crossed to where I sat by the window and, instead of maintaining the proper distance, pulled a chair close to mine and sat so that we were facing each other, our knees nearly touching. "I wanted to thank you properly," he said, "for what you did in the chapel. The doctors say that if his knife had struck where he aimed, I would likely not have survived." I waved a hand dismissively, though my heart had begun to beat faster at his proximity. "You would have moved. You are trained for such things." "Perhaps, but you did not hesitate. You saw the danger and you acted, without thought for your own safety. That is not something I encounter often in my work. Most people freeze, or they protect themselves first. You protected me." I looked down at my hands, folded in my lap. I could not let him die. I said quietly. Not when I had seen what the mirror showed us. He leaned forward, and I felt the warmth of his presence like a physical thing. Eleanor, we need to talk about that vision, about what it means. It means nothing, I said quickly, too quickly. The mirror shows possibilities, Inspector, not inevitabilities. Thomas Garrett believed the futures it revealed were destiny, and look what that belief drove him to do. We cannot make the same mistake. I do not believe in destiny, he said firmly, but I do believe in choices, and I find myself wanting to choose a future that includes you, not because a mirror showed it to me, but because in the days I have spent here, I have come to know you. Your intelligence, your courage, your compassion. The way you care for those children as though they were your own. The way you see people, truly see them in all their complexity and pain. Please, I whispered, feeling tears threaten. Please do not say these things. Why not? Because of whatever happened in your past. Because of the secrets you believe make you unworthy. I stood abruptly, moving to the window, putting distance between us. You do not understand. The things I have done, the person I was before I came here, if you knew the truth, you would not speak to me with such kindness. Then tell me the truth. He had risen as well, and now he came to stand beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat of him through the layers of fabric between us. Let me decide for myself what I can accept. For a long moment, I stood there, looking out at the grounds where police still searched for any evidence they might have missed. The autumn leaves were falling now, carpeting the earth in shades of rust and gold. Everything was dying, as it always did this time of year. And perhaps it was that sense of ending, of time running out, that finally loosened the words I had kept locked away for so long. My name was not always Eleanor Ashford, I began, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears, distant and hollow. 6 years ago, I was Eleanor Whitmore. I was married to a man named Richard Whitmore, a barrister of good family and excellent reputation. To the world, we appeared the perfect couple. But the world did not see what happened behind closed doors. I felt Inspector Hartley go very still beside me, but he did not speak, did not interrupt. He simply listened, and somehow that silence gave me the strength to continue. Richard was a cruel man, not in the obvious ways that leave bruises and broken bones, though there was some of that too. But his true cruelty was more subtle. He broke spirits. He took a young woman who had been full of hope and dreams and systematically destroyed everything that made her who she was. He isolated me from my family, from my friends. He controlled every aspect of my life, every word I spoke, every place I went. And when I tried to resist, when I tried to reclaim even the smallest piece of myself, he made certain I understood the cost. My voice had begun to shake, but I forced myself to go on. One night, after a particularly brutal argument, I found myself in his study. He had fallen asleep in his chair, drunk and satisfied with having once again reminded me of my place. And on his desk was a letter to his solicitor outlining his plans to have me committed to an asylum. He had been documenting my supposed madness for months, keeping a detailed record of invented symptoms and fabricated incidents. He intended to have me locked away, to take control of the small inheritance I had from my mother, and to be free to do as he pleased without the inconvenience of a wife. Inspector Hartley's hand moved, as though he meant to reach for me, but I shook my head sharply. Please, let me finish. I stood there in that study, I continued, reading that letter, understanding that my life as I knew it was about to end, that I would be declared insane, imprisoned in some terrible place where no one would believe my protests or hear my pleas. And I looked at him, sleeping there so peacefully, so certain of his power over me. And I thought about all the ways I might stop him. The silence stretched, heavy with implication. When I spoke again, my voice was barely above a whisper. There was a letter opener on the desk, silver, very sharp. I picked it up. I stood over him with that blade in my hand, and I thought about how easy it would be, how simple. One quick motion, and I would be free. "Did you do it?" Inspector Hartley asked, and his voice was carefully neutral, professional. I met his eyes then, letting him see all the truth of what I was. No, but only because at the last moment I understood that killing him would make me exactly what he claimed I was. It would prove him right. So instead, I took the letter and I ran. I emptied what little money I had hidden away, I changed my name, and I came here. I let everyone believe that Eleanor Whitmore had disappeared, perhaps run away with a lover, perhaps come to harm. I became someone else. Someone clean and new, and worthy of the trust Lord Ashton placed in me. "But you are not clean, are you?" he said quietly. "You are still carrying the weight of what you almost did." I turned back to the window, unable to bear the understanding in his gaze. Every day, I live with the knowledge that I am capable of murder, that I stood over a sleeping man with a weapon in my hand, and I wanted to use it. What kind of person does that make me, Inspector? What kind of woman considers killing her husband and then simply walks away to start a new life? "It makes you human," he said, and the gentleness in his voice nearly broke me. "It makes you someone who was driven to the edge of desperation and still chose mercy over violence. Eleanor, what you describe is not evidence of some fundamental moral failing. It is evidence of your strength. Lesser people would have gone through with it. Lesser people would have seen no other way. But you found one. I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe that my restraint mattered more than my intent. But I had lived with the guilt for too long to simply let it go. "And what of Richard?" he asked. "What became of him?" I do not know. I never looked back, never tried to find out. For all I know, he is still searching for me. Or perhaps he found some other way to achieve his aims. Perhaps he has another wife now, another woman to control and break. "If he is still alive," the inspector said slowly, "then you are still married to him. Under law, you are still Eleanor Whitmore, not Eleanor Ashford. You are still bound to him." The words struck me like a physical blow, because of course he was right. In the eyes of God and the law, I was still Richard's wife. No matter how far I ran, no matter how completely I transformed myself, that bond remained unbroken. And that meant the future the mirror had shown, that beautiful, impossible vision of myself in white, standing beside James Hartley as his bride, was not merely unlikely. It was impossible. "Yes," I whispered, "I am still bound." "Which is why you must forget what the mirror showed us, Inspector. Even if I wanted that future, even if I were worthy of it, it can never be mine to claim." He was quiet for a long time, and I could feel him thinking, weighing, considering. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a determination that sent a shiver through me. "There are ways to dissolve a marriage," he said, "grounds for annulment or divorce, particularly in cases of cruelty and abandonment. It would require investigation, documentation, legal proceedings, but it could be done." I shook my head. "You do not understand what you are suggesting. The scandal would destroy me, and it would damage you as well, your reputation, your career. You cannot associate yourself with a woman who abandoned her marriage, who lived under a false name for 6 years. Society would never forgive it." "I do not care what society thinks," he said firmly. "I care about what is right, and it is not right that you should be trapped forever by the choices of a cruel man. It is not right that you should have to hide who you are, what you survived, in order to be treated with basic human dignity." "Even if all that were true," I said, turning to face him fully, "even if we could somehow untangle the legal complications, there is still the matter of my intent. I told you what I almost did. Can you truly say that does not matter to you? That you could look at me every day and not wonder what I might be capable of?" He stepped closer, and this time when he reached for me, I did not pull away. His hands settled gently on my shoulders, warm and steady and impossibly reassuring. Eleanor, listen to me very carefully. I have been a detective for 12 years. In that time, I have seen true evil. I have looked into the eyes of men who killed without remorse, who hurt others for pleasure or profit, or simply because they could. I know what malice looks like. I know what cruelty sounds like, and I know with absolute certainty that you possess neither. But I wanted to hurt him, I protested weakly, because he hurt you first, because he threatened you with a fate worse than death. The fact that you wanted to defend yourself does not make you evil, Eleanor. It makes you human. And the fact that you chose not to, even when you believed you had no other option, that speaks to the kind of person you truly are. I felt tears spill over then, hot and unexpected. I had not cried in 6 years, had not allowed myself the luxury of grief or fear or any emotion that might crack the careful facade I had built. But standing there in that library, with James Hartley's hands on my shoulders and his words wrapping around me like a benediction, I could not hold back any longer. He pulled me into his arms, and I went willingly, pressing my face against his chest and letting the tears come. He held me while I wept, one hand stroking my hair, the other solid and strong against my back. He murmured soft words that I could not quite hear, but that soothed nonetheless. When the storm finally passed and I pulled back, embarrassed by my loss of control, he cupped my face in his hands and looked at me with such tenderness that my breath caught. "I will help you," he said. "I will find Richard Whitmore, and I will document his cruelty, and I will build a case that no court in England could ignore. I will give you your freedom, Eleanor. And then, if you still want nothing to do with me, if you decide that the future the mirror showed us is one you do not wish to pursue, I will accept that. But at least you will have the choice. At least you will be free to choose." "Why would you do this for me?" I whispered. "You barely know me." "Because I do know you," he said simply. "Perhaps not all the facts of your history, but the essence of who you are, your kindness, your strength, your fierce protection of those in your care. I know enough to be certain that I want to know more. I know enough to be certain that what the mirror showed us, whether prophecy or possibility, is something worth fighting for." Before I could respond, before I could tell him all the reasons why this was madness, why he should walk away and forget he ever met Eleanor Ashford or Eleanor Whitmore or whoever I truly was, the library door burst open. Lord Ashton stood in the doorway, his face flushed with agitation. "Inspector Hartley, Miss Ashford, you must come quickly. It is the mirror. Something is happening." We ran. Through the corridors, up the stairs, to the 3rd floor where a crowd of servants had gathered outside the closed door. They parted to let us through, their faces white with fear. From within the room, I could hear a sound like wind chimes, high and crystalline and utterly wrong. Inspector Hartley pushed the door open, and we stopped short at the sight before us. The mirror was glowing, bright enough to hurt the eyes, pulsing with that same silvery light we had seen before. But this time, the images on its surface were not personal visions or prophecies. They were scenes of violence and death, playing out in rapid succession like some terrible slideshow. I saw Thomas Garrett in his cell, hanging from a beam by a rope made from torn sheets. I saw Sarah Collins and Anne Pritchard in their graves, their faces peaceful in death. I saw Mary Winters, older now, gray-haired and frail, telling the story of her kidnapping to wide-eyed grandchildren. I saw Lord Ashton ruined by scandal, Thornfield House sold and empty. I saw myself standing alone in the rain, older and harder and utterly solitary. And then I saw James. I saw him in London, working a case, questioning a suspect. I saw the suspect pull a gun. I saw James fall, blood blooming across his shirt like a terrible flower. "No!" I gasped, lurching forward. But Inspector Hartley caught my arm, holding me back. "It is not real," he said firmly. "These are possibilities, Eleanor. Nothing more. We do not have to accept them as fate. But the mirror seemed determined to prove him wrong. The visions continued, each darker than the last, until finally the surface went black. Then, slowly, a new image began to form. It was us, James and I, standing before the mirror just as we were standing now. But in the vision, we were holding hands, facing the glass together. And as we watched, our reflections smiled and turned away, walking toward a door that stood open behind us. Beyond that door, I could see sunlight, green grass, a garden in full bloom. The vision held for a long moment, and I felt something shift in my chest, a loosening of the tight knot of fear and guilt I had carried for so long. Then the mirror's surface cleared, becoming once more simply a reflection of the dusty room and the two of us standing before it. "What does it mean?" I whispered. Inspector Hartley's hand found mine, his fingers lacing through mine with a sureness that felt like coming home. "I think it means we have a choice. We can accept the dark futures it showed us, let fear and past pain dictate what comes next. Or we can walk toward the light together. We can choose hope over despair, connection over isolation, love over fear." Love. The word hung in the air between us, shocking and perfect and terrifying. I looked up at him, at this man I had known for less than a week, this man who had seen me at my worst and offered me not judgment but understanding. This man the mirror had shown me married to, happy with, belonging to. "I am afraid," I admitted. "So am I," he said. "But I would rather be afraid with you than safe and alone." Behind us, I heard Lord Ashton clear his throat uncomfortably, reminding us that we were not alone, that there were proprieties to consider and gossip to avoid. But for once, I did not care. For once, I allowed myself to imagine a future where I was not Eleanor Ashford, the careful governess with no past and no prospects. Where I was simply Eleanor, a woman who had survived and who might, just might, deserve a second chance at happiness. The mirror before us remained clear and still, offering no more visions, making no more demands. It had shown us what it wished us to see. Now the choice, as James had said, was ours to make. "I will need time," I told him quietly, "to think, to plan, to determine the best way forward. This cannot be rushed." "I have time," he assured me. "I have all the time you need. But Eleanor, understand this. I am not walking away. I am not giving up. Whether it takes weeks or months or years, I will help you find your freedom. And when you have it, I will ask you properly. I will court you as you deserve to be courted. And if you will have me, I will marry you as the mirror showed us. Not because it was predicted, but because it is what I choose. What we choose together." I nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging my throat. Then, with Lord Ashton and half the household staff as witnesses, James Hartley lifted my hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to my knuckles. It was a gesture both proper and intimate, a promise and a beginning. As we left that room together, I glanced back once at the mirror. For just a moment, I thought I saw our reflections smiling, though our actual faces remained solemn. Then the door closed, and the vision, if vision it was, disappeared. But the hope it had kindled remained, burning steady and warm in my chest, like a candle in a dark room. And for the first time in 6 years, I allowed myself to believe that the light might not go out. That night, I sat in my room and wrote a letter I had been composing in my head for years. It was addressed to my sister, whom I had not contacted since my disappearance. I told her I was alive, that I was well, that I had reasons for leaving that I hoped one day to explain. I asked her to forgive me for the worry I must have caused, and I asked her, carefully and without providing too many details, if she knew what had become of Richard Whitmore. It was a risk. Any connection to my old life was a risk. But if James meant to help me, if there was truly a chance of freedom, then I needed information. I needed to know if Richard still searched for me, or if he had moved on. I needed to know if the bonds that held me could be broken, or if I was destined to remain in limbo forever. I sealed the letter and set it aside to post in the morning. Then I extinguished my candle and lay in the darkness, listening to the old house settle around me. Somewhere on the third floor, the mirror waited, patient and eternal. And somewhere in London, James Hartley prepared to leave Thornfield House, his investigation concluded, his duty discharged. But this was not an ending. It was a beginning. And though I could not see the path ahead clearly, though I knew there would be obstacles and pain and moments when I would doubt everything, I also knew one crucial thing. I would not walk that path alone. Not anymore. 3 weeks passed before I received a reply from my sister. 3 weeks during which I carried out my duties with mechanical precision, my mind always half elsewhere, imagining every possible response she might send. When the letter finally arrived, delivered by the morning post and handed to me by a maid who noticed nothing unusual about my trembling hands, I could barely bring myself to open it. I retreated to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my narrow bed with the envelope in my lap. The handwriting was Catherine's, unchanged from the elegant script I remembered. For a long moment, I simply held it, feeling the weight of connection to a life I had left behind. Then I broke the seal and read. "My dearest Eleanor," it began, and those 3 words alone were enough to bring tears to my eyes. "I cannot express the relief I felt upon receiving your letter. We have mourned you, searched for you, blamed ourselves for not seeing the truth of your situation sooner. Mother passed away 2 years ago, and her final words were regret that she had encouraged your marriage to Richard. She knew, I think, even if she could not admit it openly, that something was terribly wrong." I had to stop reading, pressing my hand to my mouth to stifle the sob that threatened to escape. My mother, gone. And I had not been there, had not said goodbye, had not offered comfort, had not been the daughter she deserved. After a moment, I forced myself to continue. "As for Richard," Catherine wrote, "he is alive, though not well. Shortly after your disappearance, he suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed and unable to speak clearly. He resides now in his family's country estate, cared for by his mother and a staff of nurses. The doctors say he will not recover. Eleanor, I tell you this not to cause you pain, but because you asked and because I believe you have a right to know. He never stopped searching for you in his way. He hired investigators, placed advertisements, made inquiries, but his condition has rendered him largely helpless, and the search has been abandoned. His mother believes you dead, or living abroad under protection of some lover. She speaks of you with venom, but Richard himself, when he can be understood at all, speaks only your name. Over and over, like a prayer or a curse. I cannot tell which. I lowered the letter, my hands shaking. Richard, helpless and trapped in his own body, unable to control anyone, unable to hurt anyone. There was a terrible poetry to it, a justice I had not sought but could not help but recognize. And yet I felt no satisfaction, only a hollow sadness for the waste of it all. The letter continued with news of family, of Catherine's own children, of cousins and aunts, and the small dramas of lives continuing without me. But it was the final paragraph that made my breath catch. Eleanor, if you wish to pursue a legal dissolution of your marriage, you now have grounds. Richard's condition constitutes a form of abandonment of his marital duties, and his prior cruelty, which I and others witnessed and can attest to, provides additional cause. I have spoken discreetly with our family solicitor, and he believes a case could be made. It would require your return, your testimony, and a certain amount of scandal. But it could be done. If you want your freedom, truly want it, the path exists. You need only decide if you are brave enough to walk it. I read those words 3 times, letting them sink in. Freedom. Real, legal, permanent freedom. Not the half-life I had been living, always looking over my shoulder, always waiting for the past to catch up with me. but actual liberation, acknowledged by law and society. The cost would be high. My name, my reputation, such as they were, would be dragged through the scandal. The details of my marriage would become public record, fodder for gossip and judgment. I would have to face Richard again, even if only from across a courtroom. I would have to stand before strangers and detail every humiliation, every cruelty, every moment of fear and pain. But at the end of that gauntlet, I would be free. Free to be simply Eleanor, belonging to no man, bound by no vows made under duress. Free to choose my own future, whatever that might be. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer of my small writing desk. Then I sat down and composed 2 replies. The first was to Catherine, thanking her for the information and telling her I needed time to consider my options. The second was to Inspector James Hartley, informing him of what I had learned and asking if he might call upon me at his earliest convenience. He arrived 2 days later, on a gray afternoon that threatened rain. I met him in the morning room, the same room where we had first spoken, though it felt like years had passed since that initial interview rather than mere weeks. He looked tired, I thought, as though his cases in London had been weighing heavily on him. But when he saw me, his face brightened with a warmth that made my heart stumble. "Eleanor," he said, taking both my hands in his in a gesture that would have been scandalous if anyone had witnessed it. "I came as soon as I received your letter. You have news." I told him everything Catherine had written, watching his expression shift from surprise to calculation to something that looked almost like relief. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking through the implications. "This changes everything," he said finally. "With your husband incapacitated and witnesses willing to testify to his cruelty, the case for dissolution becomes significantly stronger. Eleanor, if you choose to proceed, I believe you could win. I believe you could be free within a year, perhaps less." A year. It seemed both impossibly long and frighteningly short. A year of legal battles and public scrutiny and facing demons I had tried so hard to outrun. But at the end, freedom. At the end, the possibility of a future that belonged entirely to me. "I want to do it," I heard myself say. "I want to be free." His hands tightened on mine. "Then I will help you. Every step of the way, I will be there. You will not face this alone." We spent the next hour planning. He would make inquiries through his professional connections, finding the best solicitor for such a case. Catherine would gather statements from family members and household staff who had witnessed Richard's behavior. I would need to return to London to establish residence there so the case could be properly filed. It would mean leaving Thornfield House, leaving the children I had come to love, leaving the safety of the life I had built. But it would also mean stepping into the light, claiming my true name, refusing to hide any longer. As we talked, I found myself watching him, this man who had entered my life so unexpectedly and changed it so completely. The strong line of his jaw, the gray eyes that saw too much and judged too little, the careful way he spoke, as though each word was chosen for maximum precision and minimum harm. I thought about the vision the mirror had shown us, the 2 of us standing together in that small church, promising ourselves to each other. It could be real, I realized. If I was brave enough, if I was willing to fight for it, that impossible future could actually come to pass. "James," I said, interrupting his explanation of some legal procedure I had not really been following. "If we do this, if we pursue this case, and I am granted my freedom, what happens then?" He looked at me, and I saw understanding dawn in his eyes. "You are asking about us, about what the mirror showed." "Yes." He set aside his notebook and turned to face me fully, his expression serious, but not unkind. "Eleanor, I meant what I said before. When you are free, I will court you properly. I will ask your family's permission. I will follow every rule of propriety that society demands. And if, at the end of that courtship, you decide you want to marry me, then I will be the happiest man in England." But if you decide you want something else, if you find that freedom is enough and you need no other entanglement, I will accept that too. This is about giving you choices, not binding you to a new set of expectations. And what do you want? I asked. If you could choose any outcome, what would it be? He smiled then, a slow, genuine expression that transformed his entire face. I would choose you. I would choose mornings waking beside you and evenings discussing our days. I would choose building a life together, facing whatever challenges arise as partners rather than as solitary individuals. I would choose love, Eleanor. Real love, based not on visions or prophecies, but on true knowledge of who we are, flaws and strengths and everything between. I felt something crack open inside me, some last wall of resistance crumbling under the weight of his honesty. I would choose that too, I whispered. I did not know it until this moment, but I would choose exactly that. He reached out and cupped my face in his hands, his touch gentle and reverent. Then we will fight for it, together. And when you are free, when you stand before me with no shadows of the past binding you, I will ask you to be my wife. And God willing, you will say yes. I leaned into his touch, letting myself feel the connection between us, without fear or guilt. Yes, I said. Yes, I will say yes. We both knew we were getting ahead of ourselves, making promises about a future that was far from certain. There were still so many obstacles to overcome, so many battles to fight. But in that moment, in that quiet room with the gray light falling softly through the windows, it felt possible. It felt real. A knock at the door broke the spell. We pulled apart quickly, resuming the proper distance expected of a governess and a gentleman caller. Lord Ashton entered, his expression apologetic. Forgive the interruption, but Miss Ashford, the children are asking for you. Young William has had an incident with his Latin translations and is refusing to continue until you intervene. I smiled, despite myself. Of course. Please tell him I will be there shortly. Lord Ashton nodded and withdrew, but not before giving Inspector Hartley a long, measuring look that suggested he had suspicions about the nature of our relationship. I would need to speak with him soon, I realized, to explain that I would be leaving, to give him time to find a replacement governess. The thought brought a pang of sorrow. I had been happy here, as happy as I could be while living a lie. But happiness built on falsehood could never truly satisfy. I must go, I told James. The children need me. I understand. He gathered his things, but paused at the door. Eleanor, one more thing. The mirror. Have you been back to see it since that day? I shook my head. No, I have avoided the third floor entirely. Why do you ask? Because I went back, he said quietly. 2 days ago, before I received your letter. I wanted to see if it would show me anything else, any guidance about how to proceed. And do you know what I saw? What? Nothing. The surface remained clear, showing only my own reflection. I think its work is done. It showed us what we needed to see, gave us the push we needed to act. The rest is up to us. I considered this, feeling a strange mix of relief and loss. The mirror had been both curse and catalyst, showing impossible futures that had somehow become possible. And now it was silent, its purpose fulfilled. Perhaps that is for the best, I said. We should write our own future from here, not rely on visions and prophecies. Agreed. He smiled and took my hand one last time, pressing a quick kiss to my knuckles. I will write to you soon, with news about the solicitor. Be brave, Eleanor. The hardest part is just beginning, but I promise you, it will be worth it. After he left, I stood at the window and watched his carriage pull away, taking him back to London and the life that waited there. Soon, I would follow. Soon, I would step out of the shadows and reclaim my true name, my true self. The thought terrified me, but it also filled me with a hope I had not felt in years. That night, I went to the nursery and sat with the children while they prepared for bed. Beatrice, intuitive as always, sensed something different about me. "Miss Eleanor, are you leaving us?" she asked, her blue eyes wide and worried. I could not lie to her, not anymore. "Soon, darling. I have matters I must attend to in London, but I will write to you, and perhaps when things are settled, you might come visit me." She threw her arms around my neck, holding tight. "I do not want you to go. You are the best governess we have ever had." I held her close, breathing in the scent of soap and childhood innocence. "And you are the best student I have ever taught. But sometimes we must leave the things we love in order to find the things we need. Do you understand?" She nodded against my shoulder, though I suspected she did not really. How could she? She was only 10 years old, with a life of safety and privilege stretching before her. She had never had to run, never had to hide, never had to choose between survival and honor. But she would remember me, I hoped. And perhaps when she was older, she would understand that the choices we make in desperation do not define us. It is what we do after, how we rebuild, how we find the courage to stop running and face the truth that reveals our true character. I tucked both children into bed and kissed their foreheads. Then I returned to my room and sat at my writing desk, composing the letter to Lord Ashton that would begin the next chapter of my life. My hand was steady as I wrote. My resolve was firm. Whatever came next, whatever trials awaited, I would face them with my head held high and my heart finally free to hope. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, with dark wooden panels and narrow windows that let in only thin streams of pale London light. I sat beside my solicitor, a sharp-eyed man named Mr. Pemberton, whom James had recommended, and tried to keep my hands folded calmly in my lap, despite the trembling that threatened to overtake me. Across the aisle, Richard's solicitor sat alone. Richard himself had been deemed too unwell to attend, though his written testimony, such as it was, had been submitted to the court. The proceedings had taken 8 months, not the year James had predicted. 8 months of depositions and statements, of my sister Catherine standing before lawyers and describing the bruises she had seen, the fear in my eyes, the way I had slowly disappeared into myself during my marriage. 8 months of servants testifying to raised voices and broken objects and my hasty departure in the night. 8 months of medical examinations of Richard's condition, confirming that his stroke had rendered him incapable of fulfilling his marital duties and unlikely to ever recover. And through it all, James had been there, not always physically present, for his work often called him away to investigations across the city, but always in spirit. His letters arrived like clockwork, full of encouragement and practical advice and small observations about his day that made me feel connected to his life even when we were apart. Twice, he had accompanied me to particularly difficult depositions, his presence a silent pillar of strength that kept me from crumbling under the weight of reliving my past. Now, on this gray February morning, the judge would deliver his verdict. I had done everything required of me. I had told my story, painful detail by painful detail. I had submitted to questions that felt designed to break me, to prove that I was the one at fault, the one who had failed in my wifely duties. I had endured the whispers and stares of people who viewed me as either a victim to be pitied or a woman of loose morals to be condemned. I had borne it all because the alternative, remaining bound to Richard Whitmore for the rest of my life, was unthinkable. The judge, a stern-faced man in his 60s with silver hair and penetrating eyes, cleared his throat. The courtroom fell silent. "I have reviewed all testimony and evidence presented in this matter," he began, his voice carrying easily through the small space. "The case of Eleanor Whitmore versus Richard Whitmore. Petition for dissolution of marriage on grounds of cruelty and abandonment of marital duties. This court finds the evidence compelling and the testimony credible. Mrs. Whitmore has demonstrated beyond reasonable doubt that her husband subjected her to sustained physical and psychological cruelty, and that his current incapacitation constitutes a permanent abandonment of his obligations as a spouse." I could barely breathe. My heart hammered so loudly I was certain everyone could hear it. Therefore, the judge continued, "It is the judgment of this court that the marriage between Eleanor Whitmore and Richard Whitmore is hereby dissolved. Mrs. Whitmore is granted full legal independence and is free to resume her maiden name or adopt any name she so chooses. The bonds of matrimony are severed, and both parties are released from all obligations therein. This dissolution is effective immediately." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through my entire body. Around me, I heard murmurs and the rustling of papers, but I could focus on none of it. Free. I was free. After 6 years of hiding and 8 months of fighting, I was finally, legally, completely free. Mr. Pemberton touched my elbow gently. "Mrs. Whitmore, or should I say Miss Ashford, you should breathe. You have gone quite pale." I drew in a shaking breath and felt tears begin to slide down my cheeks. But these were not tears of sorrow or fear. They were tears of relief so profound it felt almost like pain. Catherine found me in the corridor outside the courtroom, and we embraced without words, holding each other the way we had as children when the world felt too large and frightening. She had stood by me through this entire ordeal, had faced down society's judgment and our family's discomfort to support my bid for freedom. I owed her more than I could ever repay. "You did it," she whispered against my hair. "You were so brave, Eleanor. Mother would have been so proud." I pulled back and looked at her tear-stained face. "Thank you. For everything. For believing me. For helping me. For never making me feel ashamed." "You have nothing to be ashamed of," she said firmly. "Nothing. And anyone who suggests otherwise will answer to me." We emerged from the courthouse into weak February sunshine that felt like blessing. And there, waiting at the bottom of the steps, was James. He stood apart from the small crowd of curious onlookers, his dark coat and hat marking him as separate, professional. But when he saw me, when our eyes met across the distance, his face transformed with joy so pure it took my breath away. I walked toward him, and he met me halfway, propriety be damned. He took both my hands in his, right there on the courthouse steps in full view of anyone who cared to look. "Eleanor," he said, and my name had never sounded so beautiful. "Tell me." "I am free," I whispered. "James, I am free." He pulled me into his arms then, holding me close while I cried against his chest. Around us, I was dimly aware of scandalized gasps and delighted whispers, but I could not bring myself to care. Let them talk. Let them judge. I had spent too many years living according to other people's rules, other people's expectations. I was done hiding. I was done being afraid. When I finally pulled back, Catherine was smiling at us both with knowing warmth. "Inspector Hartley," she said, "I believe you and my sister have matters to discuss. I will return home and inform the family of today's outcome. Eleanor, you will come to dinner this evening, yes?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Excellent. And perhaps," she added, with a meaningful glance at James, "you might bring a guest." After she left, James and I walked through the streets of London without destination or purpose, simply needing to move, to feel the freedom of going where we wished without fear or constraint. We found ourselves eventually in a small park, relatively empty on this cold weekday afternoon. We sat on a bench overlooking a pond where ducks paddled in lazy circles. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then James reached into his coat and withdrew a small velvet box. He held it in his palm, not yet offering it to me, just letting me see that it existed. "I purchased this 3 months ago," he said quietly. Perhaps it was presumptuous. Perhaps I was too confident in the outcome. But I wanted to be prepared for this moment. For when you were finally free to choose your own future. My throat tightened with emotion. "James, you do not have to do this now. We can wait. We can take time to be certain." He turned to me, and the intensity in his gray eyes made my heart skip. "Eleanor, I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I have spent 8 months watching you face down your past with courage I can barely comprehend. I have read your letters and heard your fears and seen you at your most vulnerable and most strong. I know exactly who you are. And I love you. Not because a mirror showed me a vision, though I am grateful it did, but because you are brilliant and brave and kind and real. Because you make me want to be better than I am. Because when I imagine my future, every version of it includes you. He slid off the bench and knelt before me, there in the cold February afternoon, and opened the velvet box. Inside was a simple gold band with a single pearl, modest and beautiful and perfect. "Eleanor Ashford," he said, "will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice in trusting me? Will you build a future with me, one where we face whatever comes as partners, as equals, as two people who chose each other freely and completely?" I looked at him, this man who had walked into my life as an investigator and become so much more. I thought about the mirror and its prophecy, about the vision of us standing together in a small church. I thought about how far I had come from that terrified woman who had fled into the night 6 years ago. And I thought about the future stretching before me, full of possibility and hope and love. "Yes," I said, and my voice was steady and sure. "Yes, James, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto my finger, and it fit perfectly, as though it had been made for me. Then he rose and pulled me into his arms and kissed me there in the park for all the world to see. It was my first kiss, I realized. In all my years of marriage to Richard, there had been nothing like this, nothing tender or joyful or chosen. This was a beginning, a promise, a doorway into a life I had never dared to imagine. When we finally pulled apart, both of us laughing and crying at once, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the park, an old woman wrapped in a dark shawl, watching us with knowing eyes. For just a moment I could have sworn she looked familiar, though I could not place her. Then she smiled, a mysterious expression full of satisfaction, and turned away, disappearing into the streets of London like smoke. "It was her," James said quietly, "the woman who sold my family the mirror 200 years ago. Or at least, that is what the stories claim, that she appears sometimes when the mirror's prophecies come to fruition, watching to see if we are worthy of what we have been shown." "Do you believe that?" I asked. He pulled me close, resting his chin on top of my head. "I believe in you. I believe in us. Everything else is just mystery and shadow." We married 6 weeks later, in a small church not unlike the one the mirror had shown us. Catherine and her family attended, along with Lord Ashton and the children from Thornfield House, whom I had visited several times since leaving. James's colleagues from Scotland Yard filled the other pews, along with a scattering of friends and family. It was not a grand society wedding, but it was real and honest and full of people who genuinely wished us well. I wore a dress of cream silk with lace at the collar and sleeves, simple but elegant. Orange blossoms adorned my hair, their sweet scent filling the church. And when I walked down the aisle and saw James waiting at the altar, his face full of love and wonder, I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right choice. The vicar spoke the traditional words, and we made our vows with steady voices. When James slipped the wedding band onto my finger, joining it to the engagement ring already there, I felt something shift inside me. A final letting go of the woman I had been, the frightened girl who had run into the night. In her place stood someone new, someone whole, someone free. "I pronounce you man and wife," the vicar declared. "You may kiss your bride." James cupped my face in his hands, his touch gentle and reverent, and kissed me with a tenderness that brought tears to my eyes. Around us, our guests applauded, but I barely heard them. There was only this moment, this man, this impossible future made real. We held a small reception at Catherine's home with food and music and dancing. I waltzed with James in the drawing room, his arms strong around me, and felt something I had never experienced before. Safety. Not the hiding, fearful safety of my years at Thornfield, but true security. The knowledge that I was chosen and cherished and protected not through control, but through genuine love. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself standing at the window, watching the London streets below. James came to stand beside me, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. I turned in his arms to face him. I am more than happy. I am free, and I am loved, and I am exactly where I belong. That evening, we traveled to a small cottage James had rented in the countryside, a place where we could spend our first weeks as husband and wife, away from the noise and demands of the city. It was simple and rustic, with a fireplace that crackled cheerfully and windows that looked out over rolling hills. As we stood together in the bedroom, moonlight streaming through the windows just as the mirror had shown, I felt a moment of nervousness. This too was new, this intimacy freely chosen rather than demanded or endured. But James seemed to sense my hesitation. He took my hands and kissed them gently. "We have all the time in the world," he said. "There is no rush, no expectation. Tonight and every night, we move at whatever pace feels right to you." I looked at him. This good man, who had seen me at my worst and offered not judgment, but compassion, who had fought beside me for my freedom and asked nothing in return except the chance to love me. And I knew that with him, I was truly safe. "I love you," I whispered. "I do not think I have said it enough, but I love you, James Hartley, with everything I am." He smiled, that warm expression that transformed his entire face. "And I love you, Eleanor Hartley, my wife, my partner, my future." We came together then, and it was nothing like the cold transactions of my first marriage. It was tender and awkward and absolutely perfect. Two people learning each other, choosing each other, building something new from the ashes of what had come before. Later, as we lay together in the darkness, his arms wrapped around me and my head resting on his chest, I thought about the mirror, about its visions and prophecies and the impossible future it had shown us. We had fulfilled its prediction, but not because we were compelled by fate or destiny. We had fulfilled it because we chose to, because we fought for it, because we refused to let fear or pain or the past dictate what we could become. The mirror had given us a glimpse of what was possible, but we had done the work of making it real. "James," I said softly, "do you think the mirror is finished with us now?" "I think," he replied, his voice rumbling in his chest beneath my ear, "that the mirror showed us what we needed to see when we needed to see it. Whether it has more plans for us or not, I cannot say. But I know this. Whatever comes next, whatever challenges or joys the future holds, we will face them together. And that is enough. More than enough." I closed my eyes, feeling safe and loved, and finally at peace. Somewhere in a forgotten room at Thornfield House, the mirror stood silent and patient, its silvered surface reflecting nothing but shadows. Its work was done. It had shown two broken people a path toward healing, toward hope, toward love. What we chose to do with that gift was up to us, and we had chosen well. Outside, the night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. Inside, wrapped in James's arms, I drifted toward sleep with a smile on my face and lightness in my heart. The future stretched before us, full of possibility and promise. We would build a life together, James and I. A life of partnership and respect and genuine affection. A life where I was not defined by what had been done to me, but by what I chose to do, who I chose to become, who I chose to love. I had been Eleanor Whitmore, trapped and terrified. I had been Eleanor Ashford, hiding and surviving. Now I was Eleanor Hartley, free and loved and ready to face whatever came next. The mirror had shown me a wedding night, but the life that followed, the years of joy and challenge and growth and love, those were mine to write, ours to write, together. And that was the greatest magic of all.